Humans are equipped with a highly tuned survival instinct, built to react violently to sudden threats. Yet, when the environment around us is soft, warm, and moderately pleasant, that same instinct goes entirely dormant. This behavioral blind spot is known as the region beta paradox. It describes a specific, dangerous band of existence. Conditions that aren't painful enough to force an exit, but fall far short of anything resembling fulfillment. When you encounter acute suffering, a viciously toxic relationship, or a deeply abusive boss, the psychological alarm bells ring. The distress breaches your threshold for tolerance, forcing you to sever ties and rebuild. But an okay life offers no such catalyst. A job that pays just enough to cover the bills while boring you to tears, or a partner who is polite but distant, generates a dull ache rather than a sharp sting. Without that acute pain, there is no trigger to leave. Moderate comfort strips away our urgency, locking us into a state of permanent complacency, where ambition quietly expires. This complacency breeds a specific psychological coping mechanism, an idea known as the deferred life hypothesis. We convince ourselves that our current mediocre situation is merely a prelude. We imagine that once we finish this month's administrative tasks, or finally pay off the car, or reach next year's promotion, our actual vibrant existence will finally commence. We treat the present as a holding pattern, waiting for a day when all problems vanish. But problems are a permanent feature of existence. By waiting for a frictionless reality, we guarantee our life never truly starts. Escaping this holding pattern requires breaking equilibrium, and the moment you attempt it, the environment pushes back aggressively. You see this socially in phenomena like tall poppy syndrome. When one individual decides to stop drinking, start a business, or pursue intense physical training, the collective peer group often responds with mockery and resistance, actively attempting to cut the outlier down to size. This social drag mirrors a strict biological law. Left to their own devices, all living systems naturally degrade, losing their distinct temperature and energy until they match the cold, inactive baseline of their surroundings. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins observes that staving off this exact decay is the primary work of biology. Our bodies must constantly burn calories just to remain hotter than the air around us. Maintaining any differential, whether it's biological heat or personal ambition, demands a massive, continuous expenditure of energy. A complacent peer group acts as a freezing climate. The friction of constantly justifying your new habits to friends who want you to remain the same drains your psychological reserves. When that exhausting work stops, the differential disappears. Surrendering to the comfort of the group means merging entirely into the environment, erasing whatever made you an autonomous individual. We can observe the terminal outcome of this surrender on a national scale in South Korea. This line chart plots the country's plunging demographic trajectory. It illustrates a birth rate that, over the next century, will result in only 4 great-grandchildren for every 100 citizens currently alive, a 96% reduction in population. When we overlay data points showing the widespread adoption of digital entertainment and solitary conveniences, an inverse relationship emerges. The demanding, high-friction responsibilities of building a family are being systematically replaced by accessible, low-friction comforts. This retreat into convenience is actively modeled by the culture's highest status figures. In the K-pop industry, stars are contractually obligated to remain celibate, projecting a highly polished, entirely solitary existence to millions of fans. At the macro level, the math is unforgiving. A collective retreat into easy, consequence-free comfort ultimately results in the quiet, inevitable expiration of an entire society. If a life of extreme comfort leads to both personal misery and demographic collapse, we have to ask why our biological drives aggressively prioritize it. Entrepreneur and philosopher Naval Ravikant suggests an answer by looking at the core mechanics of human motivation. He argues that our behaviors are rarely driven by the active pursuit of joy. Instead, actions like procrastination and defaulting to easy tasks are simply the brain executing its primary directive, the avoidance of discomfort. Even intensely physical drives, like the urge to reproduce, begin as a form of physiological tension. The ensuing action is not an independent pursuit of pleasure, but a frantic effort to extinguish the pain of that unfulfilled desire. This reframes human motivation entirely. Much of what we consider the pursuit of happiness is merely an elaborate, lifelong retreat away from friction. Running from that friction leaves us with an internal void. To cope, we frequently stockpile observable metrics, padding our bank accounts, upgrading our cars, and chasing prestigious job titles, hoping these outward markers will compensate for the lack of internal substance. But the individuals who acquire these things reliably report an unteachable lesson. No amount of external accolade can fill a psychological emptiness. The material padding simply insulates you further in the beta region. Breaking that insulation requires enduring what is known as the lonely chapter. This is the mandatory period of severe social and personal friction, where you have outgrown your old environment, but haven't yet built a new one. There is no magical escape velocity, where life's difficulties suddenly drop away. Moving upward demands pushing through immense atmospheric pressure, shedding your old dependencies, and accepting that problems will always exist. The only real choice is what kind of problem you want to solve. True fulfillment requires embracing the agonizing friction of growth, rather than allowing yourself to be quietly buried alive in a tomb of your own comfort.